absolute cinema. Hey everyone, JJ Reviews here. Today I'm going to be reviewing the critically acclaimed, highly anticipated Marvel's Spider-Man 2 by Insomniac Games. Taking place after the events of the previous game, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales in 2020, and also the prequel of Marvel's Spider-Man 2018. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is bigger, bolder, better in many ways. If the first two games were the template, this game is the refinement and the pure mastery of their craft. Marvel Spider-Man 2 is, in a nutshell, a roller coaster ride for the ages. One thing a Spider-Man game must get right is the web swinging, and they've outdone themselves again. From Marvel Spider-Man in 2018, from the basic swinging to in Miles Morales, Venom jumping and Venom diving with tricks incorporated into the swing for more momentum. Marvel Spider-Man 2 gives you way more options in terms of how to traversal around the city. You have web wings, which you can speed through wind tunnels to travel at the city at great lengths. You can also use slingshots that will sling you far beyond the city at way fast speeds to pick up momentum. And also there's the loop-de-loop mechanic that's also introduced. These mechanics all combined gives you such a more broader and awesome more feel of Spider-Man. This game by far is the best web swinging. It's not even close. And I thought that back in the original Spider-Man 2018, that was the best web swinging. It continued to improve and refine the system that, quite frankly, they really didn't have to touch. Combat here is relatively the same, but they spice it up and change it just a little ever so slightly. The parry system adds a new layer to the mechanics, and there's some interesting combos that you can pull off with the parry. There's also powers such as, Peter's symbiote abilities, Peter's mechanical arms, as well as Miles's yellow lightning abilities and blue lightning abilities. They're all interchangeable once you get to the story, but it adds and spices up the gameplay so much more. Also, for stealth, there is web lines that you can use, which could easily take down your foes from if you want to play silent. Boss battles are also greatly improved from the first game. There was even improvement within the Miles game, but this takes the cake. In the first game, you had a ton of webbing, dodge, web, and then you beat up the boss. In this game, you have to use webs, parries, gadgets, everything in the combat system in order to fight against the bosses, and it makes them more fun. They're more harder, they're more engaging, and there's even a health bar. Voice acting was quite honestly phenomenal, as expected. The standouts, in my opinion, would be Yuri Lowenthal. When he tapped into the symbiote, you could hear the rage and the pain in his voice.
Oh, this feels good. Carlos, you live. Get your boss needs better aim.
Najee Jeter, he was way convincing as Miles, and then also shout out to Tony Todd as Venom. He was literally menacing. Last but not least, also shout out to Jim Perry as Kraven. Every single time he was on the screen, he was menacing, demanded the attention, commanded the room, commanded the scene, and I just wish that we honestly had more time with him. He was that awesome.
There are no good men. Only good prey.
Within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, there's a lot less side quests compared to the first game, but I would say the side quests are a lot better. Insomniac focused a lot on quality over quantity this time, and it greatly benefited. Still have your stereotypical enemy bases where you're knocking out enemies in a controlled environment. There were numerous amounts of side missions that made you feel Spider-Man-y. There was the helping out with the school of Brooklyn Visions. There are, walking grandpa across the street. These little things that just make Spider-Man wholesome and why Spider-Man is the everyday guy. There is a side quest in particular where you play as one of the characters known as Haley. She is deaf, and I think it's very tremendous, especially with like disabilities, and especially with a high profile AAA game such as this, that there is representation amongst the disability community. But there was also some problems that I found within Marvel Spider-Man 2. There are quite a few bugs that I encountered where I got stuck inside of a wall or things of that nature. Also, it's very disappointing that a lot of features that were in the first two games were taken out, such as character bios. They're always fun to read, and it's always cool to, like, as the game like progresses, to see like the journals of such and such characters such as Miles and Peter, how like they get realizations within the game, and I just always love to read them. The podcast with J. Jonah Jameson and the Danica cast, there is no archives for them, so if you accidentally miss one while you're doing Flying Through the City and it cuts off, you can't listen to them again and hear what they were saying, and that just sucks because J. Jonah Jameson and Danica I both find hilarious, especially Jonah. Also, I found that in the post game, relatively, there is nothing to do. Something that the Miles game improved on that's somehow missing in this game is that you could replay missions after you finish the game, and you can't do that right now, which is terrible. Also, New Game Plus isn't a thing. That's just not right, and something that Miles Morales had at launch, and there's no excuse for why this isn't a feature at launch. Moreover, even in the Miles game, you could select your own crimes to do, especially once you finish the game in post. You can't do that in the post game. It's at random. That also sucks. For those of you that like photo mode, they took out the selfie poses, which were very fun to do. Why was that taken out? For what purpose? They were in the first two games. Why is it gone? There's just a lot of things that you can tell that they rushed the game out in certain aspects because fan favorite interactions and things that were greatly appreciated are taken out for no reason at all. It's also disappointing that many gadgets from the first game will not be returning. There was a plethora of gadgets that Peter used that they could have helped differentiate, and the gadgets that the two Spider-Man use are the exact same, which doesn't help differentiate the Spider-Man's powers except for when they're using their specials, which kind of sucks and makes them feel more similar. Also, personally, I'm not a huge fan of Peter Parker legs or mechanical arms. I just think that there would have been a better way to incorporate differentiating Peter a bit, because mechanical arms seems a bit too high-techy for Peter Parker. And I just think that if they did something along the lines of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, where they turned the webs into hammers and stuff like that, it would have been a lot more cool and feel more on brand with Spider-Man and his creativity. When talking about the overall story of Marvel Spider-Man 2, you have to break it up in 3 parts: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I found Act 1 to be kind of the most boring part of the story. It's mostly the tutorial, and it pretty much gives you insight on, our characters narratively. Peter still can't keep a job because of Spider-Man. Miles is trying to find a way to balance being Spider-Man while also trying to prepare for his college essay. MJ and Peter, their relationship is not straining, but there's some tension there because MJ could also get fired because there's new management at her job. And then combined with all that, Harry, who we learned in the first game was terminally ill, is back and is healthier than ever. And that's when the story really starts to pick up the pace a bit. One thing that I think that this game gets right is that you can feel the friendship between Peter, Harry, and MJ, and they talk like and feel like best friends that have, haven't seen each other in a while. And what is awesome is once we start to get the symbiote, things really start to get crazy. The symbiote is actually on Harry, and it's actually the one that's keeping him alive. And so what's fun is that we have Agent Venomous, and Peter and Harry are basically tag teaming and being a duo. But Miles, he's also trying to deal with Martin Lee, the killer of his dad, who also escaped from prison thanks to the Hunters, which we know as Kraven's, who's one of the villains, his gang. But things start to get pretty much out of hand when Kraven, wants to basically hunt down all of Spider-Man's villains. He's actually killed a few, and he's going after the Lizard, who is basically the inventor of the symbiote. Our dilemma basically is when Peter and Harry try to stop Kraven. Kraven ends up almost basically killing Peter, and the symbiote latches on to Peter, leaves Harry, and now we're stuck with a Harry who started to become clinically ill, Dr. Connors, who turns into the Lizard, and that leads us into the next act. Act 2 is probably some of the most fun stuff. We get the, classic symbiote story, all the power with no responsibility. We see how over time Peter becomes more angry, more vicious, and his friends are starting to notice. Miles, he's still contemplating over Lee, so I feel like he pretty much for the entirety of Act 2 is sidelined until he's the one that helps get Peter free. We see cool advantages that the symbiote has, which is it can change, suits into tuxedos so it can sneak into Kraven's lair, but we also find that there is a major weakness in its frequencies, and Kraven has decided that he wants to hunt down the symbiote because of Harry literally almost killing him. Also within Act 2, we start to learn more about Kraven. Kraven is a guy that's basically dying, and he wants to basically have his last hunt someone to basically kill him. He wants to go out on his own terms. Kind of weird. But to also talk more about Miles, Miles gets caught, gets captured. MJ almost dies by Peter. There's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on within Act 2 that I just think that it's very fun. And then once he does get the suit off, you're going back to Oscorp, and Harry's waiting for you, and he is pissed that you won't give him back the suit. It doesn't help that Peter was, while he with the symbiote suit, was a jerk to Harry. He wasn't what a friend would be. And now you're telling him that you can't have the suit back. It brings a lot of tension, but Harry does get the suit back, and we get the iconic Act 3 is probably the craziest portion of the game, but it's also one that I felt was the most rushed. So we do get Venom. You get to actually play as Venom, which is really cool, and he tears up Oscorp. You get to fight Kraven with Venom. Venom straight up kills him, like something that I wasn't expecting, where he legit eats his head off. And I just thought that it was so cool that Kraven finally was satisfied he had his last hunt. But since Harry knows who Peter is, he decides to target the only family he really has left, and he goes after MJ. And it's one of the craziest boss sequences ever. She ends up becoming Scream. But what I thought was really interesting and cool was that within the boss battle, it's pretty much a therapy session with everything that basically has happened to them. And in many ways, MJ is kind of right. But immediately after this boss battle, this amazing boss battle that is 4 phases, you go and you fight City Hall, you become Anti-Venom. Things just immediately go off the rails with this game, off the rails. And it's just he gets Anti-Venom with the help of Martin Lee. Martin Lee and Miles reconcile. Miles doesn't forgive him, but gets the hatred out of his heart for him. And it's pretty powerful. I think that in the essence of his story is pretty powerful. How do you forgive someone who has done immense harm? Do you think they deserve a second chance? Things like that gives a lot of compelling narrative structure. The Anti-Venom add-on to the game is probably the best way to have Peter still get the symbiote powers for gameplay wise, and also I think it works story wise because he is the answer to the symbiotes in order to destroy the symbiotes. One other thing to talk about with Act 3 is that Miles gets a new costume, basically an Adidas promotion, and the suit doesn't look good. Narratively, I don't get it, because within the Miles game, the narrative was that he wanted to be his own hero. He needed his own growth. This just comes out of nowhere, especially within the story confines. Peter was out fighting symbiotes, and somehow Miles had time to make a new suit. It's kind of weird and awkward choice narratively wise and pacing wise, and it just doesn't make sense. Like, even the final fight, it's done really well. You got Mary Jane pretty much being John Wick, I guess, but like you also have the fight between Peter and Venom, and it's pretty emotional. And then Venom like does some super crazy stuff, and he like gets these wings and all that, and then you fight him as Miles. And I think what's lacking there is that Miles doesn't have the emotional connection to Harry like Peter does, and it kind of takes me out the fight a bit. Not even gonna lie, it's kind of strange that they went that way in terms of that you don't get to fight Venom as Peter again, but they did team up, which is cool. And Norman basically hates the Spider-Man, and he wants to pretty much find out how to kill him at the end of the game. And that leaves room for those of you that don't know Green Goblin, which isn't in this universe as of yet. Overall, I just think that Marvel Spider-Man 2, when it's at its best, feeling like Spider-Man, the side quests, even the side quests that lead into future installments, whether it's DLC or sequels, they're fun. They're heart-wrenching side quests as well. But like the story is a little bit convoluted. I still think it's fun. I still think it's a game that everyone or anyone that has a PlayStation 5 should check out. And overall, it's a story that anyone can relate to. There's many different themes that you can relate to. Second chances being the most prominent. Harry got a second chance and he became Venom. Peter gets a second chance at life and with his relationship. Miles gets a second chance with college. And I just think that it's a narrative that I would just leave it with. It is probably one of, if not the best Spider-Man game ever. And that's with its problems. It's not a perfect game, but I love the game nonetheless. I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10.